Have you ever wondered how to render like this? Hi, my name is Nana. I'm also known as Putputpotato online. I'm a content creator, an artist, and I would love to teach you how to shade today. Throughout the years, I've acquired a very quick and efficient way to render, in my opinion, very high quality artworks. And today I'd love to teach you how to do that too. So let's get into it. So how do we go from this to this? If I tell you there's actually not that many steps involved, you might think like, oh, Nana, this is a little bit very optimistic, but I'm actually not kidding. There is a total of 5 layers involved, and you don't need any special extra brushes that you get online or anything like that. We usually only work with the lasso tool and a very soft airbrush. So really, there's not much magic to it or any complicated science. So let's get right into that. But before we start with the process, I'd like to really take a closer look at some of the tools we're using. Number 1 is the lasso tool. If you've never heard of that, then you've probably never opened a 2D illustration program before, and you should start getting onto that. No, I'm kidding. But there's this one, usually in Clip Studio, but any drawing software has this tool. Trust me. What it does is just make a selection. Very simple. You can always add to the selection using Shift or subtract from it using Alt. And then once you have your selection, the cool thing about it is that you can use your pencils and only draw inside of it. As long as the selection exists, you cannot draw outside of it. You can also always move the selection, and by that you could draw multiple elements like a pattern or, reoccurring elements in the distance, something like that. It's very efficient. And then once you're done, you just click outside of it, and that's that. You can also obviously transform and move stuff that you select with the tool. Let's take this shape that I just made and use transform. Very easy. Super cool. Best tool, in my opinion, that I've ever learned to use. My teacher was always very intent on telling us that. He was always about like sharp edges, very important. But yeah, today we're going to use that to our advantage. Another tool that is very important for our shading process are the blending modes. Also something that reoccurs in every drawing software ever, and it's specifically about layers. This is how a color is added onto the color beneath it. The blending mode decides that. Let's say we have this orange tone on our layer. Right now it's on normal mode. It's just perfectly opaque, there's nothing to it. It's added right on top of everything without letting anything shine through. We can also obviously turn down the opacity, and then it's only 50% or in this case 48% on top of our usual colors. But what we also can do is change which system the computer uses to add the color on top of the other colors. So what do we have here? A billion different blending modes. We need in total 2, which is multiply, which you've probably heard about before, usually used by artists to darken an area or add shadows to something. What it does is it multiplies the value of the color that you've placed on top of the others. That makes it darker. The other blending mode that I love to use is color dodge. Usually artists will often use add to add light. But I feel like add usually results in very pale colors, and there's not much vibrance to it. So if you have a style that is very saturated, very colorful, like my own, you will find more vibrance in color dodge, because it keeps more of the color itself that you've placed in the artwork, like this, for example. We have blue, or maybe we want some green or some purple. You can tell that these different colors really still shine in themselves while also adding some brightness. While if we use add, the colors kind of flatten a little bit and the contrast goes out of the window, which we don't want. So we use color dodge. For highlights, however, we are going to use add since it gives that last final popping shimmer, because for the highlights we don't want color, we just want a popping shine. So now that we've prepared our tools, let's get into how to start. As preparation, you know, when you bake a good pie, you should always lay out some flour so the dough doesn't stick to the surface. We're going to do the same. We're going to make us a nice base, an even base. Before you start shading, make sure that all your base colors are coherent and that they actually fit together. I'm going to show you how this artwork looks like without the shading in total. So I've made sure that all the colors fit together and also that the values have a little bit of variety. You don't need to be too strict with the values in this phase because you are going to add some shadows and light, but keep in mind that still the shapes of the character or whatever motif you're drawing should differentiate from the background with enough contrast. You can always do that with a layer on top, which is filled completely with gray or black or white, and then set that to saturation. Then you automatically see your picture in black and white, and you can always check your values really quickly, which I love. And like, just blend it in and out, and you can check at any time. Once we've laid out our base colors, what do we do first? We start with the ambient shadow. The ambient shadow is the shadow that the object casts on itself. These are not cast shadows that are casted from another object onto the object, but rather by itself. When you have a sphere, you usually have a cast shadow that is cast onto the floor. But there's another shadow that is part of the entire composition, which is the ambient shadow. This is the shadow that is cast by the sphere itself. So how are we going to include that in our artwork? We always need to think three-dimensionally. Our face right here is supposed to be three-dimensional. So what does that tell us? We have this kind of sphere. If we very much simplify the head, it is almost a sphere, and then the chin will act as a kind of half circle. So we know where to place our shadows now. Before we do that though, I want to remind you that it's always good to work non-destructively. Non-destructively means basically you can change stuff at any point in time, which will definitely make your life easier if you want to do some last minute changes for a customer who doesn't actually know what they want. How do we do something non-destructively? I'll show you. Instead of going right in with a color and like, you know, our multiply layer and right away putting our colors down, no. This is not what we do. What we do is we fill the entire page with the color, and that's it. No, I'm kidding. We fill the entire page with the color, and then we will add a mask. You will usually find these also in every drawing software with this symbol attached to it. And then you have this extra layer part to the layer, which is usually white. We will make this one black. In every other drawing software, you can just press Ctrl-I and it will just invert and then it's black. But Clip Studio was like,
not like other girls. I'm not gonna do that.
So now we need to delete the entire white part of the layer. But now we have an empty layer. What does this do for us? When we switch between our layers, between our ambient shadow layer and our cast shadow layer and all the other layers that we're going to add, usually what we need to do, if we don't have the mask, is we have to pick the color every time we switch our layer. But what we need to do in order to pick the right color, because this is not the right color, this is the multiplied version, maybe we even turn down the opacity, even more complicated. What we need to do to get the right color is to put to is to turn up the opacity back to 100 and also put the layer back on normal so that we get the actual color that we want. That's so much work. We don't want to do that. So what we do is we place our colors. What you also can do, what I like to do, is make a gradient for the shadows. So what we have right now is a little more bright pink in the middle and then more desaturated purple in the outer corners. And then you have this gradient, and once you use your mask, you don't actually need to pick the color anymore. You can always just go in and draw onto your layer, and it will automatically fill in that color because all you do is just edit the parts that are visible, which is amazing and so much easier. So now we can add our ambient shadow. These are, again, the shadows that are created by the face itself. So we would also place this, for example, in here in the crease of the eye, maybe a little further down, all the way until for the nose. The nose will also create a shadow of itself. There we go. And you use this very soft airbrush combined with the lasso tool. And what it does, what I love about it, is it gives you a perfect mixture of hard and soft edges. So what does that mean? We have this very clear and clean cut right here, but also a very nice and smooth gradient outside. This is something a lot of beginner artists fail to do, is they either have too many clean edges or too little clean edges. So they usually draw with only airbrush tool, and then everything looks very washed out and very grayish and stuff like that. So this is what we're trying to avoid here. So the same thing we can do with the nose right here. The nose casts a shadow on itself. We use our lasso tool to make the selection of where we want the shadow to be. Then we use our very soft brush. We can also make this one really big so the gradient is even softer, and then we just place that up here where it's darkest, and down you will see there's a sharp edge right here, but also a very nice easy gradient over there. So this is what we do. Alright, so now we have our ambient shadows placed. That was already really good. Something I forgot to mention also, in case you're wondering how to pick the colors for your shadows and lights, very easy. Very easy. Usually I just go with the surrounding colors, the background colors, as either the light source or the shadows. And then for the shadows or the light source, the comparison, the opposite thing, basically, I just use the opposite color on the color wheel. So right now we are using a very nice pink for our shadows. So in order to make our lights very nice and contrasty and vibrant, we will probably use something around here. So just a green, and with the blending mode it'll look really dope, trust. So what's up next? We have our ambient shadows down, so we're gonna do cast shadows next. These are the ones that are cast by other objects onto our face, or in this instance our face, or usually just our subject. Right now that will be the hair very much, also a little bit of the nostril right here, and the upper lip, maybe a little bit right down here where the eye folds will create a shadow. That's already about it. So what do? This time we keep our shadows a little bit more sharp, And again, lasso tool, very easy. We can add some to it, and we will just make sure that the shadows are below the subject that is casting it. So right now we are including shadows of these hair strands. So these would probably be right around here. And notice how I'm including a curve right here, because there is a shape that's going on this face. The eyebrow bone will stick out and then also go in where it meets the eyelid, so your shadow will follow that shape. I would always recommend to do some studies and just look at references if you are unsure about how to place your shadows or how to identify the shapes. But yeah, at some point you will just get a feeling for thinking three-dimensionally once you've practiced enough. I still use references all the time, but you know, at some point you will get less confused by it. So we do the same thing right here. We will make our base layer. This time we're not gonna use the same color shadow that we did for the ambient shadow, just to get a little more dynamic into it. So what I like to do is, we are already at a pink for the ambient shadow, so we will draw a little more towards the opposite color. And what I like to do is to just draw towards the colder color, because usually when you have sunlight as a light source, the sunlight is very warm, and therefore the shadows are cooler because there's less sunlight in the shadows in contrast. So what we're gonna do is we just use our ambient shadow and then go a little more towards blue on the color wheel, probably around here. And you can also desaturate that color a little bit, because with the multiply layer, it gets saturated really quickly. And if you leave all of your shadows at the same saturation, it gets very noisy and like the eye cancer meme very quickly. So I would not recommend you do that. So instead we use a very nice desaturated purple right now. So fill the entire canvas again. Again, once more, you can also include a little gradient. Right now I'm using a bluer version of this color and also a more desaturated version to really just make this gradient down here. And then set to multiply, and we are adding the mask. And once again, deleting everything. There we go. So now we can add our cast shadows. Again, I'm gonna make this selection real quick. There we go. Soft brush. Make it pretty big, but not too large, because otherwise you're gonna lose track of everything. And now we can just very softly add this cast shadow. So now we've got our cast shadows placed, very nice even gradient, but also our sharp edges. But another thing that we can add, which I always feel like gives a little more depth, is a little bit of a blur effect. I think that Clip Studio has one of the best blur tools out there, but there's always good alternatives for every single drawing software. Usually, for example, Photoshop's blur tool is not the best, but you can always find very good smudge brushes by independent artists and people who supply their self-made smudge tools, and usually those work really, really, really well. But what I like to add is, for the shadows that are a little bit further away, to be a little blurry. So now you can always see that this adds a little more depth feeling to it. Also this one, because it's further away. So yeah, a little bit of a combination of the two that makes for a good dynamic shadow. So now I'm gonna add the other ones. Alright, that's it for our cast shadows. So now we're gonna move on to our lights. Lights are... I did not place a lot of lights on the face in this instance. Most of the lights are placed up here in the hair. I can show you. These are the lights that I've placed. also in the metal, like a little bit of shine, but we're still gonna place some on the face just so you know how to do this. So as I said before, we have our ambient shadow color, and usually for the light we'll use the opposing color on the color wheel. So I'll go somewhere around here in a turquoise, and also make that one very dark because color dodge tends to make the colors pop very, very brightly. And so that the lights are colorful and not white, we can use a very dark color for our base. This will be something like this. Then we turn it on color dodge, and you can already tell, like, this is already very bright. Imagine if we use something like this bright, then it's just white. There's no dynamics anymore, which I want to avoid. So we're using this dark turquoise, and then again adding our mask, leading everything, and then we can start to add our lights. So I'm gonna place the lights this time on the forehead, because this is where the most direct shine will be, always excluding the shadows, of course. And then using our lasso tool and a very soft brush once again. As you can tell, I'm using pretty much the same process for every single layer because it just works very versatile and for every situation and shading that you could imagine. So here on the waterline, I usually also like to include some makeup hacks in my shading because makeup is just art as well, and you are painting the face, so it really works well for illustrations. We can also add some on the cupid bow, maybe like this, and maybe even here below the eye. Very, very subtle one here because I don't want this to be too crazy. Like this maybe. That was already too much. Yeah, like this. And maybe some on the chin if we're feeling a little freaky. Alright. Let's add some here as well for the symmetry. Okay. So right now it's very hard to see and not very popping, but if I remove this, you will see there's a little bit of a difference after all. So now that was that for our lights, for our soft lights. And now we're gonna do highlights. What is the difference here? So soft lights is just the general light that exists around our frame or the subject that you're drawing. When we have our hair, for example, which this is fake obviously, but you can see what I mean. You see there's a shine around where the highlight is placed. That's just the light bouncing off the object. But we also have very sharp highlights in stuff like lip gloss or hair or metal, something that is very shiny. And this is where our last layer for shading will be included. This is the highlight layer. So for the highlights, I usually just use the same color as I did for the ambient shadow, but a very bright version. So we'll use up the pink again, but we'll go all the way up to here, somewhere almost 100% brightness. So we can fill this again, and then we turn this one to add. And you can already tell this one's very bright. We can also just turn it down a little bit if it's too much for us. I always do that because I overestimate myself. And then we do our spiel with the mask again and then add. So on the face right now, maybe we can think about adding a highlight right here on the nose. I've seen some people do that. I don't usually do that, but it can, I mean, for my style it looks a little bit stupid, so we're not gonna do that. But there's some styles out there who really utilize the pointy nose look, so absolutely go for that if that's for your style. We can definitely add a highlight in here in the corner of the eye. Again, makeup tip. So like this. It's a little bit strong, but we can decrease the opacity. There we go. And then obviously for the lips, unless you are wearing a very matte lipstick, you will want to add some juicy highlights. So we're gonna just select some drops here and there. Very random selection. Always make sure that these are very dynamic because the lips have a very uneven surface. And then again, soft airbrush, and we're gonna add these highlights in here. And then we already have our very juicy feeling. So yeah. Last, I wanted to touch on some extra steps that I included, not necessarily for the shading, but for a finishing touch. First off, we have a colored line art. If you notice over here, the line art is not completely black in all patches. This is how it would look like if it wasn't colored. I feel like it's very flat still, and colored line art can add so much. Usually I add a very reddish or pinkish hue to the features inside of the skin or inside of the face. And not for the entire eye, because I still want the eyes to be the focus, but for the inner corner, a little bit of glow can really make the entire face look more natural and softer. And what I also do, of course, is to add some brightness onto the liner that is actually covered by the hair. I still want these parts to be visible, but I don't want them to be basically out there, like the hair is not there in some weird way. If we weaken these parts of the line art, we can make sure that the transparency of the hair is communicated, but also that the shape of the eye doesn't get lost and everything's more balanced. Yeah. And last but not least, highlights. This is what the piece looks like without the highlights. It's very lifeless. It looks very eerie, like a doll more likely. But if we add these highlights and also the pupils, because I forgot about that for some reason, the eyes become more shine, and with that they become a soul. They receive a soul, they get a soul. I cannot speak English. It's not my first language, leave me alone. But yeah, that's all I really did for this piece, and that's all I did for the hair and the metal and all the gold here, or these charms over there, the piercings. All of these items, all of these aspects really only consist of the layers that I've shown you just now and all the techniques that I've shown you. Why is this such a viable method, in my opinion? As you can tell, I was really fast with that. Also, I can always change stuff about, like, and at any point, if I notice, ooh, this shadow is looking a little weird, I can always just go in and change the hue to a completely different one, which is amazing if you want to do some last minute changes when you're already very far ahead in your process. Let's say you had all of that, what I just showed you, on the same layer. There's no way you could just choose an aspect of the piece and change the color or the brightness or the opacity by just in a second without all these layers. Also, I feel like the combination of the lasso tool and the airbrush tool is very nicely anti-capitalism, because you don't have to spend money on complicated brushes or anything new to add to your drawing software. And these two tools are literally the base tools that every single drawing software possesses. So yeah, that's why I absolutely recommend this technique. It's also applicable for literally every style. You can, except for obviously, I mean, even in cel shading, really, you can still use this technique, but you can also use it for painting, for bubbly illustrations. You can do this for desaturated illustrations. It's literally applicable for everything that you can think of. So that was how to render like Putputpotato, and let me know what you thought about this tutorial. It was the first of its kind that I did, and I really hope you enjoyed yourself and maybe learned something new for today. If you have any other things that you would like me to talk about, or just stuff that you don't really get or want to explore further, please let me know in the comments below. And also subscribe if you like my channel, and leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And by the pencil, I'm glad that you tuned in today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.